Welcome to Transforming Medical Communications, a podcast by MedComms experts. We share medical communications insights and advice from the best and brightest in the industry to find out what they're doing to push our industry forward. Here's your host, Wesley Portegies.
Welcome to the Transforming Medical Communications podcast. I'm your host, Wesley Portegies, and today is a special episode because today we have three guests joining me, and we're going to demystify third-party platforms. So in the rapidly evolving field of medical communications, digital platforms like Sermo, Kudos, and Figshare play a pivotal role in enhancing the way medical affairs communicates through digital channels to their HCPs. So joining us today are Charlie Rappel. Charlie is the co-founder and chief customer officer at Kudos. He brings a wealth of experience in maximizing the impact of published research. We also have Dave Schaub, vice president of medical affairs at Sermo, and he's known for his expertise in driving meaningful peer-to-peer collaboration and discussions with the HCP community, especially digitally. And we have Dan Valen. Dan is the head of strategic development at Figshare, and he focuses on optimizing research content management and enhancing accessibility. So together, we're going to discuss how their platforms contribute to the digital communications ecosystem of medical affairs and how you can integrate these platforms in your medical communication strategy. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
To start things off, I would like to talk a little bit about how third-party platforms like yours fit within the medical affairs communication ecosystem. So what role do these platforms play in the strategic outreach of medical affairs? Maybe, Charlie, we can start with you.
Sure, yes. I think part of the challenge that medical affairs, publications teams, MedComms agencies, everyone across the sector is facing up to is the proliferation of different places to put content. And you're putting that not only in your own site and on your own websites and repositories that you created, but there's lots of other platforms that are specific to certain types of content or specific to certain audiences. And there's a sense, I've got to be in all these places at once. And then you get layered platforms like ours sitting around the edges or across those other ones. And you think, I don't know what to do with so many different platforms. But I think the key is, and you touched on it right there, Wesley, was taking a strategic and purposeful approach. And I think gone are the days when you could rely on your own platform and your own channel and a single point of access to your content. You have to be in different places. And therefore, it's really helpful to have a purposeful approach to the different channels that you're using and the different platforms you're using to manage them. And I think ultimately different platforms have different strengths. They're for different types of content and different audiences. And that's why you end up having to use different third-party platforms rather than just being able to do it all yourself and hope for the best.
I guess what I'm hearing is maybe like you can, of course, create the best content ever, but you're going to be a little bit limited as a medical affairs organization in reaching your audience without help of these platforms. Yeah. Dave, what is your view on that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We know medical affairs teams are putting together great strategies and great content. The problem is, where do you put that to get the amplification that you're looking for? Publications, publication extenders, abstracts, posters at congresses, even symposia. There's a lot of great information being developed, but how do we get it to the right person, the right marketplace, the right HCP, patient, whoever it may be, because there are so many different ways to do it. And you really need to start looking at a couple of different ideas. What's the mindset of where you're going with this data? Is it patient-oriented? Is it physician-oriented? What is the content? Is it a video? Is it a publication? Taking your strategy and looking at the objective of where do you want that information to go and how do you want it received? Because there are so many different ways that you can put it out in the marketplace.
Absolutely. How about you, Dan?
Yeah, I'd just like to build on the responses from Charlie and Dave. And I think the idea of having specific dissemination channels for scientific information is really important. I'm approaching this from the side of we are one such channel, whereas the other two members of this podcast are more about collating that information. But just being able to identify places to disseminate that information and allowing different teams to share those research outputs, be it plain language summaries or supplemental data, open access manuscripts, it not only enhances transparency and accessibility, but also improves discoverability of the content that medical affairs professionals are trying to disseminate and can in turn improve discoverability among HCPs and maybe the general public and help folks understand the type of research that you're trying to share.
Yeah, that makes absolutely sense to me. Maybe as a follow-up question to that, where do you feel the industry stands with effectively leveraging these platforms? Do you feel this is like early stage where we have a few early adopters, or is like everyone doing this already? Where do you feel pharma has like a lot of opportunity here, if any?
At least from my perspective, it still feels fairly early days, building off of the success of plain language summaries and different ways to disseminate that information. As Charlie noted, gone are the days of the idea of the single website to showcase everything. So you need to be able to leverage the best ways to disseminate this information in a way that makes sense for the audience that you're trying to reach. So is it going to be a specific platform for a specific type of content? And how is that going to ultimately get to the set of eyes, or I guess in some instances, machines that you want it to?
I would agree with that. I think it really depends on who the manufacturers are and who potentially the MedCom agencies are. We have organizations with Sermo who have been, from a medical affairs point of view, very active for years. They have teams within their organization that are omni-channel and digital medical affairs experts. And they do quite a bit of work in understand how to use these different platforms very effectively. We have other manufacturers and agencies that, as Dan said, are in their infancy. They're trying to learn and educate themselves on how to use these platforms most effectively. So when we go in, we're really trying to find out where do these clients potentially sit on that learning curve, because some are all the way there at a deep end and others have their floaty zone and are just starting.
I totally agree with what you've both said there. And I feel like in the pharma sector as a whole, in terms of the rate of adoption of companies and the rate of progress, we're at very early stages. But there are clearly people and individuals who are extremely experienced here and very creative and have a really good understanding of the job to be done and the direction of travel. I think Dan and I both work for organizations that have initiated in the academic and scholarly publishing sector, where some of these challenges were tackled 20 years ago in some cases. And I think we both enjoy watching how some of the very hard and hardly crafted solutions that we've all really had to work out how to do things in a useful way, how those can then quickly help to accelerate things in the pharma sector, because we're not having to reinvent those wheels at this point. So I see things being at an early stage in terms of where companies are at and their appetite for risk, and that is an evolving picture in itself in terms of experimentation with new platforms. But the great thing is that as soon as some of those processes are complete and you can really start to get things moving, you can accelerate very quickly from there, because a lot of the challenges have already been tackled by the partners and platforms that you're working with.
No, I like that perspective. It's like, so you're saying like this, the solutions are in place and we're waiting for medical affairs to catch up with that.
Basically, I think a lot of the hurdles have been cleared in other places. Now, from our platform's perspective, we've definitely found there's so much that we can do to customize that and make that a really good fit with what medical affairs and publications committees need. It's not that we're saying, here, have what academia figured out and make the best of it. That it is also really fun then saying, okay, here's where we've got to in the work that we've done to date. Here's now, oh yeah, we could tweak that this way. We can repurpose that bit of toolkit, or we can relabel that part of things. So there's still plenty of ways in which we're also trying to work out where med affairs are and meet them there, rather than expecting them to join us where we are.
Yeah, maybe I exaggerated here a little bit, but like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, as an agency owner, what I see like, most of the time is this movement towards digital solutions where the solution is actually in place, but there are other hurdles like the MLR process and so on, and what pharma companies feel, and specifically medical affairs, feel comfortable with, right? So we see the first companies having their medical affairs social media handles, for instance, which took a long time, right? So, and I think it's good to know that once more and more companies are jumping on the bandwagon here, platforms like yours are also going to be more an established solution for them. So what would companies miss out on? So let's say you are working at a medical affairs company and you're building your digital omni-channel strategy. Let's say for some reason they either don't want to or cannot work with third-party platforms at this point. How would it impact their communication strategy?
I think a lot of the conversation we have with people is about audience and discoverability. And it's just not enough to create a piece of content and put it on your website. The web is too crowded. That content is just not going to be visible to that audience without you purposefully trying to make sure that it is discoverable by that audience. And this is a really delicate and sensitive area for this sector. And it's something that medical affairs people are open to experimenting with, but really constrained in the nature of how they can experiment. And obviously working with a third-party platform, you really want to be confident that they understand that and that they are aware of the boundaries and the limitations that you need to function within. But ultimately, with so much insight and thought and time going into creating that content, it really isn't going to do your company the job that you want it to do if you aren't also putting that time and energy into the discoverability and into finding that audience, putting that content in context and making sure that it does the job you've created it to do.
Yeah, I've been attending a lot of the medical therapy conferences across the globe, your NAPS and your ISNAP and Mass Bias in the East and such. And there's always huge interest in this discussion around omni-channel education or omni-channel strategy. And part of that omni-channel strategy always has a bar that comes off or a line that comes off. It's a social strategy. But what they don't look at and what they isn't in the consideration, that social strategy or that TPP strategy is huge. There's all different types of opportunities and different objectives that should be looked at when it comes to your strategy there. And so often you'll see social strategy and you'll see one or two different social sites, and that's all it's discussed because, again, we haven't gotten to a point in medical affairs where people are thinking about all these different sites that can be used for different strategies and different objectives.
Yeah. And you can always have in the back of your head the idea of the build versus buy and how much time do you want to spend building something versus working in communities or with products that have already tackled some of that. So as Charlie noted, having done a lot of this work in other markets or other segments of the market, but where those stakeholders are still similar, be that academic research or academic publishing or funding agencies and government agencies, and ensuring that you have that experience in working with a lot of these stakeholders and best ways to capture, describe, license, and disseminate that content in a way that makes sense to the community. It makes that transition a lot easier if you are someone like a med affairs professional and trying to understand what you aren't allowed to do. I think having that experience and having that background and working with those types of organizations, it lends a certain amount of credence, and it also saves a lot of time for a med affairs team in, can we do this? What is the best way to do it? So having a lot of those answers already, I think that's a benefit to a third-party platform versus trying to just stick content on a website. I know that's simplifying it, but...
No, but that's such a good point. It's a bit like, why would you work with a MedComms agency? Because you can leverage other people's experiences. We have been through compliance processes with several pharma organizations. We know what needs to be explained about our platform to make it acceptable as a discoverability toolkit. So leverage what other people have already done, both technically, but also in terms of that compliance process.
I really like that. So I guess the bottom line of what I'm hearing is you already have access to the community, right? So you're a conduit between the content of the medical affairs organization and the audience they're trying to reach. And then you're referring to buy or build, right? It's like, okay, like how much effort, time, and investment would it cost to reach so many people as your platforms can? Because I'm sure you have many visitors and access to so many different healthcare professionals that it would probably be impossible for any specific company to just replicate that easily. So in other words, they can focus on creating high quality content that does the best like educational job for them and leverage your platforms to make sure it then actually reaches the audience, right? So your focus is maybe more on reach, while their focus can then be on content development. Does that make sense?
Yeah, or lends a certain credence to. I don't want to talk down a brand of a pharmaceutical organization because they obviously have a lot of reach themselves with their own brand, but lending credence to that, already having worked in the community and understanding some of those hurdles that everywhere from the authors and researchers themselves to some of the staff members or folks that are part of larger organizations and how they want to disseminate that content. So it really just depends on what your ultimate goals are with the materials that you're trying to share and with the audience that you're trying to reach. I know we're talking in a circle there, but it really does feel that way.
So what are some misconceptions about these platforms that you have maybe encountered?
Of what platforms and websites are and how they function and how they are found. And increasingly, basically driven by Google and the way it functions, everything is becoming a kind of interlinked web of content, whatever platform it's on. We all know that despite the very powerful brands and legacy platforms of government level that healthcare professionals have had built for them over the years, still go straight to Google in most of the cases when they're looking for information. Even though they know they've got access to other toolkits, Google might even be a better way of searching those other more dedicated platforms. So we all know that in any context, including our professional lives, Google is just the most powerful way of driving traffic to content. But I think we know that in one level, and then often can still pursue a digital strategy that is a little bit more siloed. And I think one of the challenges that I often find myself talking about is people, for example, looking at my platform and Dan's platform going, which of these do I need? And I'm like, they both work really well together. You're going to have huge amounts of content living on Dan's platform. You're going to drive discovery of that content through my platform, for example, or you're going to promote specific amounts of discussion about it through Dave's platform. Like, the point is that these platforms all work together very well. And that is an increasing requirement of any platform in any sector in this day and age. You have to be able to play well with others because you're going to have to. We don't operate in that kind of siloed way anymore.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at social platforms, again, when we start talking about the social piece of it, there's a real misconception that you've seen one social platform, you've seen them all. And you really need to start looking at your closed networks versus your open. Sermo's closed network, it's HCPs only. You have to be an HCP to be on the site. Whereas other platforms, Facebook, Twitter, X, they're open. And what is your objective? Are you looking to get medical information to HCPs that are coming to a site to be educated? Or are you looking to get information out to a broader group around, who knows, corporate affairs, activity that a group did at a Congress? You really need to start looking at those mindsets. And I think the biggest thing that I see is, why would I want to use one site over another? And the misconception is they don't realize there are major differences in all these platforms. And it's our job to explain to them why you would use one over another, not that you wouldn't use them all, because there are reasons to use every one of those platforms, but you got to make sure that your objective aligns with the platform you utilize.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that is why we're here today too, right? I was really thinking about inviting you all to this episode because I have a lot of conversations with people that are exploring opportunities to drive their digital communications, mostly medical affairs professionals. And the question is often like, which platform should we pick, right? And the answer is, well, it depends. And it might not be one. So what are you communicating about? Like, what is the audience you want to communicate to? What kind of data are you communicating? And there are so many different factors that you need to consider. And I completely agree that every platform has its own like pros and cons, and it's a puzzle to figure out exactly how to combine these best. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. Before we do so, I think it would be good to really understand like some of these differences specifically to your three platforms. So I would like to invite you, maybe we can make a quick round here, and maybe you can tell about like one distinct value of your platform that makes it different from the others.
Yeah, so as Charlie noted, a lot of our platforms all complement one another really well. And so they each serve, I think, a different part of the scientific communication workflows that a lot of these med affairs professionals are trying to work toward. And at least from a Figshare perspective, one of the misconceptions that we have is like, it's just a repository for data. And while that's true, we do that really well. And that's how the platform got started. It serves as a way to showcase content in a really easy manner and curate that content in a way that makes sense to the organization that's trying to disseminate it, all while ticking boxes for best practices in scientific communication. So we try and explain to organizations that our platform allows you to upload content, describe it, mark it up for discoverability, and license it for reuse. And everything also receives a digital object identifier. So you can then track the attention and potential impact that published research is having. And a big thing that I wanted to jump in on the last question that I think also lends itself really nicely to this one is it's not a further siloing of content, because coming from space where we're steeped in open research and sharing that research and working across different platforms and with other tools and trying to meet researchers and authors where they are, that requires a lot of open content and allow these tools to talk to one another. So having a fully documented API that is openly available, that allows people to build tools on top of a platform like Figshare, or pull content out of the platform and push it into other places, so that content can be highlighted and meet the user where they are.
I really like that. How about Sermo, Dave?
Yeah, I think the most unique aspect about Sermo compared to a lot of other social platforms is that, again, we are physician only. So we have 1.5 million physicians around the world that come to our site on a regular basis to do two different things. They have peer-to-peer discussions. Peer-to-peer discussions are how physicians have been trained to learn. It's how they are educated. So they come to our site to be able to share cases, to talk with physicians around the world about an issue they may have, around an educational need they may have, a question they have. That allows us then to look at them and do some background research per se, social listening. We can find out what doctors are talking about, what's important in the area of oncology, what are they looking to see at the next ASCO. And by doing that social listening, we can help our clients then understand what types of information, what types of messages need to be sent to these HCPs so that we can educate them on the issues that need to be raised. If it's a new indication, changes in guidelines, a publication, you have a publication and you've done an infographic and placed it on one of the other sites. How can we help drive physicians to that infographic about your publication? So those are all places where I think we're different, because we are ACP only when it comes to social site, but we do educate and train and allow for this peer-to-peer discussion, which other sites don't allow that two-way discussion, because we can, especially in a trusted environment where these physicians know they're talking to a physician and having these conversations.
Yeah, so it's more bidirectional. Nice. Charlie, how about Kudos?
Yeah, I think it's almost like we sit in between those two things in a way. So one part of what we do is providing a single entry point to content that is distributed across a lot of other channels, because you need to use the right channel for the right kind of content in a lot of cases, but then you want to be able to point people to one shop window for it, if you like. So our showcasing content that is on other platforms as well as ours, drawing it all together in one place. We're also then guiding people through and helping people more strategically manage the communications around that. So we have a whole toolkit for planning your communications across a team and for measuring the effectiveness of all the different channels you use. And that is both online and open channels and offline and closed channels. So whether you're talking about putting links in email signatures or putting up posters at workshops or giving people handouts or business cards, or having a conversation in Sermo, or using X or Blue Sky, all these different channels are being used in different ways in medical affairs. And the really critical thing is that we do that strategically, measure them consistently, and also map those communications against meaningful metrics like the discussion that Dave was talking about there, listening in on the sentiment of that, mapping it against citations of publications and things like that. The very proliferation of content types and channels has made it really hard to measure consistently what is actually getting people to content. What is it that is driving engagement with the content or citations of the publication? So that's the bit that we're trying to fill with tools that help people manage communications more strategically, more consistently, and then provide a basket of metrics to help you compare and contrast across very different ways of communicating.
Yeah, I like that. And seeing your tagline, there's also some kind of storytelling element to it, correct?
Yeah, there is. This is part of my challenge always. There's so many different things that we do, but one of the things we really champion is plain language summarizing of content and storytelling around it, which are not always the same thing. So the storytelling can be a little bit more about the bigger picture and the context. And we've done this across many sectors now, encouraging researchers of many different types to explain the context of their research, to talk about its potential impact, touching back on what Dan was saying earlier. And this is not necessarily a unique part of what we do, because I know that plain language summaries exist in a lot of other platforms too. It's one of the tools in our kit that we think is really pivotal to that communications process, because nobody goes looking for the dense terms of an abstract. When you go to Google and you start searching, even if you're a specialist in that field, you will often use plain language in how you start your discovery process. So by describing content in plain language, you're not only enabling it to be more easily found by people in the field, but also making it more cognitively accessible to people in adjacent fields, or to patients who, of course, we're increasingly trying to engage and involve. So we see a plain language summary and the kind of storytelling around research as being a really powerful part of making sure that it is more widely found and read and understood and applied.
Amazing. So yeah, this is really exciting. Now, I always really like to give explanations in the most practical and real life way possible. So I thought maybe we can do a little exercise together today. And the exercise would be, imagine that I am maybe a prospective customer from medical affairs, and we're having a conversation, and I'm wondering how I could use your platform best. So what if you would take the feature that you just described and maybe outline a little bit like what kind of challenge, or maybe you can refer to a past project, right? So maybe you can outline a medical communication challenge that you have dealt with in the past for a customer, detailing out the strategy, how did you go about solving that challenge, and what were then the outcomes in a short, practical fashion. And then maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, for sure. The thing I touched on was the ability to publish content, not necessarily just data. And that is really the first use case that we had in the space. Was a client came to us with defined problems. They said they have plain language summaries that are post-publication that they didn't have a home for. They had supplemental material tied to peer-reviewed manuscripts that they wanted to showcase. And they were curious about green open access or self-archiving workflows to be able to publish or archive journal content where the publisher allows. And so this is that idea of the misconception of Figshare just accepting data. We can and did meet all of those use cases and have since expanded to include enhanced publication content. And a big reason behind that is Figshare is a repository that allows you to upload and showcase any type of content that you see fit. And where we really excel is allowing organizations to curate that content and present it and describe it in a way that makes the most sense for them. So we were able to create individual parts of the repository to be able to highlight specifically plain language summaries. And you can even filter beyond that to highlight a specific therapeutic area or what have you. And all of that is tied to this ability and work that we had done previously with academic publishers, with research universities, and the funders themselves to ensure that the content that we are publishing meets all the best practices and requirements for sharing and disseminating scientific research. And so making sure that it is well described, making sure that it is licensed appropriately, and that administrators at the organization level have the ability to license that content. And so we've really seen uptake in how the platform is being used and expanding on those use cases, which has been really exciting, but then also integrating into new workflows. So this aforementioned client recently built an integration between their manuscript submission system and Figshare so that they can actually push content from the manuscript submission system directly into the Figshare platform and automate that description of content. So filling in the required metadata fields and Figshare spitting out a DOI and having that information come back across and communicate to the publication platform. So it's not only having this ability to showcase content in a way that makes sense for an organization, but also being able to work with internal systems and communicate with those systems. And I know Charlie can also speak to how her platform uses a lot of those data sources like a Figshare to communicate to the wider ecosystem.
Thank you, Dan. Charlie, you want to go next?
Yeah. I think that's a great example of what I was saying, that some of the challenges here, like identifiers for different kinds of content, but a consistent identifier with a registry that is consistent and handles and lookups. So there's all of that kind of stuff we've had to grapple with for a long time now in the scholarly space. Same for us, right? Those integrations with manuscript submission systems, that's amazing for everyone involved. Do it once, use it multiple times. Like Dan says, so easily able to put all of those pre-figured out solutions into the hands of pharma and make it work really well for Med Affairs as well. We had a client who came to us who had created a knowledge hub on their own platform and lots of really powerful, good quality content. And it had taken months, if not years, to get all of this together and live. And then it was just sitting there and nobody was finding it. Nobody was going to it. And they were really frustrated after so many people had put their heart and soul into this exciting new initiative that they thought was going to revolutionize access to their content. And they said, we need somebody who's going to be the engine of discovery for this. We need someone who's going to help us get an audience in front of this. And that was where Kudos came in. And so part of the challenge was that they also did use other platforms. So they had created their own hub that had certain types of content in it. They also had content on Figshare. They also had content on YouTube, various other places. And also in that picture was the transience of some forms of content. So a congress is happening and you've got some papers on the congress site, but the congress site is only going to live for 6 months. So there was a lot of different challenges in the mix. Part of it was about driving traffic to their new platform. Part of it was about joining together different content that was coming and going around their therapy area. And so we were like, let's create you a showcase that you can keep that as a rolling update of the available content. You can have a kind of consistent way of presenting it, beautiful UX, really good, well designed to attract search engines, not specifically to that page necessarily, but to use that page as a vehicle for getting people from the search to your content. And will sit as a discovery layer that helps to make the content more visible. Partly that is about surfacing it to our own audience, which, as you said, Wesley, we've built up over 20 years or whatever of working with publishers, but partly that is about more active and in the background, making sure that the types of things that people are searching for, we're reflecting the language that people use and mapping that against the content that's being created and showing search engines the connection between this is what people are looking for, here is the content that has the answer to that. And that's a very specialist area of expertise that is constantly evolving. And it's one of the things I'm most proud of that we do, because in the end, it's just not enough to create your content. You have to find ways to reach those audiences. And then you have to have a very professional and purposeful approach to managing that. So yeah, that's one of the examples that we have with a partner who had put so much time and energy into creating a platform that no one was using. They brought us in to help increase the discoverability and make sure it was really getting to those audiences.
Yeah, I like that, the discovery engine. Maybe as a quick follow-up on that, like, are there any metrics you can share?
This is the really helpful thing. What I love about our platform is that we bring in not only things like the altmetric scores so we can see the level of open discussion, we can also bring in citations and see how the discovery work that we're doing is correlating to actual increases in papers being cited, but we can also see some really short-term, real-time statistics, which On the one hand, we all know that we need to pay attention to maybe longer term metrics, but still everybody wants to see the needles moving quickly, especially when a lot of time and energy and discussion has gone into things. So one of the things that we're really quickly able to show is here is the traffic that came in, here is how the views of the pages on our site grew, here is how that has translated through to traffic to your site. And then the other super cool thing that we're doing is capturing really interesting data about who those people are and what they are doing with that information. And that, for all of us, perhaps a bit less so for Dave, but certainly in the scholarly sector, there's always just been an assumption, oh, this is all just academics looking at this content and we don't need to dig any more deeply than that. Now that we're working with pharma organizations, that's one of the first things we've been asked for is, well, can you break this down? I don't just want to know, is it an academic or a healthcare professional? I want to know exactly what kind of therapy area they're working in. And I want to know exactly what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. I want to know what they did with this information that I provided. And that's all stuff that either we're already beginning to capture or on the roadmap for this year. So this is our exciting expansion area at the moment, is just gathering much more granular data and being able to roll that up in terms of the actual content or the pages or the channels. Who's attracting which kinds of audiences and what are they doing with that information? And that's the sort of gold dust for us at the moment and very exciting.
Yeah, so to be specific, did you manage to drive traffic to the Knowledge Hub?
Yes, we did. What's been interesting is that we can get hundreds of views of the pages on our site. The big thing for us is then what is the conversion level for that? So typically we see about a 20% conversion level of people coming to our site and then going on. It's a bit of a challenge because in some of our content, actually the information that we provide on our platform is enough. That's all that people want. They don't want any more than a plain language summary. They just wanted to get a sense of things. With our pharma partners, we have actually a higher rate of conversion because that is more the goal of the page, is to actually get them to go through to the Knowledge Hub. So yes, exactly. That's the part of it that is most exciting, is that we not only see the communication activities working, but also ultimately the traffic growing and the Knowledge Hub.
Absolutely. And I like you mentioning that because, and I know we had some previous discussions and some real case scenarios about this topic as well. And we're often helping our clients as well understanding how much to communicate in that case, right? Because if you communicate at all, there's no reason for conversion anymore. So a strategic decision to like spark curiosity, maybe provide enough to be interested in more, right?
Yeah, it comes back to what Dave, Dan, I have said all along. It's all about what is your objective, who are the audience, and what do you actually want them to do at the end of this process. If the most important thing to you is that they visit your website, then everything else has to be geared to that. And that is something that can be intentional. Google is constantly trying to just suck everything back into the results page and provide all the information there. And we've all got a tendency to want to do that. We all want to make the content, the pages, the channels that we're providing and using as comprehensive as possible. On the other hand, you built this platform. The goal is to get traffic to that platform. Let's not give away all the value elsewhere in the attribution stream.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Dave, I know you're ready to share, so bring it on.
Yeah, we work with our medical affairs partners, especially around different types of programs. We do 4 different things. We first go onto the Sermo site and do some listening. We then do some polling to understand the listening that we have brought in. And I'll give you the example. The listening that we brought in is aligned with the data that we collect. We then help you develop the educational materials that will address the findings from our insights gathering and our market research that we do. And then on the back end, once we roll that out, we'll measure the impact of that. Best example I can give you is that there was a therapeutic area where new guidelines were coming out for the treatment of a disease. We wanted to work with the agency to find out what was the best way to communicate these new guidelines, because not only did they want to do it with our MSLs, but they wanted to make sure their outward promotion was on Sermo would align with what their needs were. So we went up to the Sermo platform, went to the group of physicians in this therapeutic area and asked them, first of all, do you follow the current guideline? Are there issues with the current guidelines that you need to do? And we collected that information to be able to say, okay, here's where some of the gaps are in the current guidelines. Do the new guidelines address those gaps? Yes, they did. Great. So we know what the guidelines are going to address and know the gaps are filled. So now let's educate on the new guidelines, what the changes in those guidelines are and what the impact is to the audience. And so we can actually plan for the impact of what those guidelines are versus putting them out and say, okay, what's going to happen? We then test those guidelines. We test and measure the impact of the educational program by looking at a control group on the Sermo platform versus the test group. Did those who received the educational information have a change in their perception versus control group? So if they saw the educational material, were they more likely to understand the guidelines and be aligned with the guidelines and change their perception? Were they more likely to follow those guidelines if they had seen the educational material versus not? So we get down to very specifics about change in perception, change in habit. If it's a new product being launched, what are going to be some of the messages you're going to want to address around the launch based on certain issues? So we don't just put stuff onto the site and hope that it works. We know from upfront research and analytics that we do that the messages that we're going to be putting onto the Sermo platform actually are going to be received in the right way to have positive impact on perception and potentially how they might work with different physician types, working with the payers and those types of information. So we really try to make a package instead of just placing something on site. Worked extremely well. We saw 50 to 60% changes in attitude when it came to the control group versus the test.
So it's a very strategic approach to communications, right? First, understanding what your audience kind of needs and is interested in, and then playing exactly into that area.
Yeah, publications are extremely important. And when you do infographics and such, you know what the publication says. Let's put an infographic together, point that out. So we can go out and actually take the two different forms of infographic and say, which is better? Is it this visual? Is it this visual? Is it this type of information? Is it this message? And we can test different infographics online with our platform, with the physicians, and they come back and say, based on the research that we have, this is the most important graphic. This is the most important message. Now let's put that all together to design the right infographic, then to be able to disseminate through the multiple platforms.
Yeah, makes total sense to me. Sounds really good. I want to switch gears a little bit, and maybe we can talk about social media. And for some people, third-party platforms and social media are one and the same thing. To me, it isn't. That's why I coined the term third-party platforms and keep it separate. But maybe we can talk a little bit more about it. I'm curious to your views. Dave, could you maybe talk a little bit about the complementary roles of traditional social media and how third-party platforms fit into that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that we went earlier is what is social media and how do you use that? When I look at a site like Sermo versus a site like Exida is a social media site where professionals will go, looking for development. They'll see who was promoted and was moved to a new institution. But when you look at TPPs or a site like Sermo, it's what is, again, the mindset of these individuals going to. Social media is very social, entertainment, whereas Sermo and some of these other GPPs are really a medical and clinical mindset. That's what people are coming to the site for. What's nice about what I'm hearing it says that we've got sites where there's information being stored, but how do we get people to do it? Do we do it through Google search, or can I go out to 12,000 oncologists in the United States and say, new data has been published on X, and here's a link to the information where it's available. So there's a lot of the ability for us on a social closed platform to be able to interact with other TPPs to work as a team to be able to drive people through that. Because biggest issue I saw both in the manufacturing side and the MedComms side, we can develop great materials, we can develop great websites, we can develop great platforms, but on a medical affairs site, how do you get people to it? How to get people to it? You got to go to a site where people are looking for that information reactively, not proactively. So they come to Sermo, they see a site, they go to there. Whereas you go to other social media, very opportunities to put information out, but are you giving the right people? Are you putting it in front of the room? So great opportunities to work together. Again, it all depends on what's the objective. Are you driving people to see a new publication, or are you driving information to raise awareness for your shareholders?
Yeah, I really agree with everything that Dave was saying there. When we founded Kudos, social media was still massively in the ascendancy. It was still relatively new for a lot of people. So it was a relatively big part of what we thought we were trying to support was the authors of research publications in using platforms like Twitter, as it was, like LinkedIn and Facebook, to tell other people about their research. And we wanted to help them track that and demonstrate the effectiveness of that to justify their use of platforms like that, maybe within institutions that might have been skeptical about that. So it was there in our early days as something we were trying to support and bring a bit of professionalism to in how researchers were using social media. What very quickly became apparent to us that it's just such a small part of how researchers communicated. There are audiences there in social media. It can be, as Dave says, the right way to engage for some things with some audiences. But it's a very fast-paced environment now. The waterfall is just constantly moving. Your drop is just going to be flash and gone. It's not by any means the most effective way to communicate research. And once we started offering this system that was tracking all the different ways that people communicate and comparing those at a like-for-like basis, of all these communications, how many drove how many clicks through to the content, it became really apparent that email was still powerful beyond belief. Discussion lists. So we're looking at specifically researchers, and they might put out a tweet and it gets 10 clicks. They put a post on a really old-fashioned Telnet style discussion list and they get 4,000 clicks on that. And that's a highly qualified audience as well. So social media is in the picture for us. We do still integrate with those platforms. We capture data from them. We feed content to them and we measure that alongside all the other things. But it's a very small part. And it's whilst medical affairs folks are experimenting more with social media now and being given the ability to go and register and use it and talk about their work and their content on there, there is still a lot of hesitation about it. So I often don't really talk that much about social media, and I think it's really helpful, Wesley, thank you, to have coined a different term. I don't think of myself as a social media platform at all. It's just one tiny little droplet of how people communicate, and we try to be open to exploring that and continuing to support that. But really, there are many more ways that people communicate, and most of them are through closed platforms like Dave's or through channels that are just not visible but are still extremely powerful.
Yeah, that's a good insight. How about you, Dan? Any particular views on this?
We're seeing in social media right now that people are shifting their focus and finding new communities. Blue Sky is a really good example where the hashtag academic sky has really taken off as a new way for academics and researchers to communicate their publications or their research that they're doing. Just to build on what Dave was saying, audience and access are huge. Social media platforms by design are open to the general public. And with that comes a diverse audience of both real and fake people in the form of bots. And I think TPPs are typically a little bit more restricted or verified by organizations that are working with them. And it gives you a level of curation of that content and also a certain sense of validation, ensuring that the organization that is trying to disseminate that content has given it its own stamp of approval. Then you have social media in the background as a way to communicate that info if you would like to reach a wider audience. If that audience exists, are people migrating from one social media platform to another? I think that's a big focus as well. So that's where platforms like a Sermo, I think, can really benefit because you have a focused audience. You can, again, put that stamp on it and say, this content that we're sharing here is used for educational purposes or is used for patient education or what have you. And that lends itself a certain level of accuracy in a world of misinformation. So,
Dan, you're exactly right. One of the biggest benefits I try to talk to my medical affairs partners with is the credibility and the trust that you see with members of the Sermo platform. They come knowing that they can have these discussions. They're not getting information from other specialties, not physicians, corporations. It's physician, peer-to-peer, and that makes us right at the top when it comes to trust and credibility.
Yeah, that's a good point. Something I was thinking about while you were sharing your views on this was also the budget considerations, right? Because as long as you don't use paid media on social media, it's pretty much free. Do you have any conversations about that with customers in terms of maybe showing that even though that might sound free, it maybe doesn't bring them fully to their objectives, and how do you go about understanding that I guess we can't really say return on investment in our medical affairs space, but like efficacy of communication tactics.
100%. This is why I love bringing all the data together in one platform about communications, because the story tells itself. I don't have to persuade people. I just show them a table or a graph with rows of what you achieved in each different channel. And in different clients and for different audiences, we will do paid social, for example. So sometimes I've even got the data to say, look, we did the organic stuff. It takes time. You spend time, even if you're doing it with generative AI or whatever, you're still taking time to craft that content and set it up and so on. So it's not free, as you say, Wesley. And it's just tumbleweed because all of those platforms are so oversaturated with content. Even if you're hashtagging it with the most strategic strategy you can think of, it's still just been and gone in a heartbeat. The rate of views or engagement. So obviously those platforms will show you maybe hundreds of views of a post, but actually how many people spent any time on it or clicked through on it, that's when you really get the measure of it. And it is poor. I think our average shows that across hundreds of thousands of tweets, across hundreds of thousands of years, the average click-through from them is something like 10, if that. It's low. Whereas one carefully targeted paid campaign that is getting much more carefully to the right audiences and putting that content up consistently in front of them is going to achieve 100 times that or whatever. So depending on spend, blah, blah, blah. Now, that's a different market in a set of examples, but it's just showing that the free aspect might seem free, but it's time down the drain in a lot of cases. What's much better is to have a carefully curated and communicated plan that goes to a specific audience. And in the pharma sector, we have to be very cautious and careful about how we reach those audiences and who those audiences are. But that is still a more effective strategy, time for time, than experimenting rather fruitlessly with free social media.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a little bit of a mindset shift involved here, right? Because if you look at like the more traditional approach to medical communications, like I think everyone is used to journals for open access or publishing fees or relatively expensive copyright fees when you want to repurpose some of your materials, depending on the journal. No one is really surprised by that, right? But now, like investing maybe more in reach and other channels, like the new, like I guess the new channels like yours, the digital online channels where you would also need to invest to reach your audience, that seems to be a little bit odd at this point, right? So I feel there's also a mindset shift that needs to happen a little bit to understand that. I think on the commercial side, of course, we have been used to that for decades. From a marketing perspective, that is more normal to do that. But now the role of medical affairs has changed so much, and educating HCPs on the science and everything around it is tremendously important. And you can't really do that anymore effectively, I think, if you're not present in the online world. So I'm just kind of wondering how this will play out over the years.
I do think we'll see a lot more content marketing in the sense of creating content around the content. And I maybe am not being visual enough here, but I can't see much beyond Google at this point. It's a really effective mechanism by which people look for and find stuff that they need the moment that they need it. So for me, that still guides all of our discovery strategy, is thinking about that person who in all these different scenarios is sitting there, they're typing something into Google. How do we get them from there to where we want them to be? And of course, the challenge around that is that the way that Google ranks things changes on an hourly basis and is extremely opaque to the rest of the world by design. So we have to keep up with interpreting what puts things higher up in the rankings. Now, at the moment, a huge part of what will see you well ranked in Google is Q&A style content. It comes back again to what we've just been talking about in terms of tackling fake news and misinformation. There is a sense of people asking questions and wanting an authoritative answer, and Google really trying to deliver on that. So a big part of the role of content marketing will be to signpost authoritative content, reframe it in Q&A form or whatever the flavor of the day is with Google. So at the heart of it, you might have a trial and a drug, and then you've got the peer-reviewed publication layer. Then you've got the educational content. And I think increasingly we'll see another framing of that content, which is designed to signpost it in accordance with the latest trends in search engine optimization and search page results rankings. And for me, that's as far as I can imagine out from here that things will go. I can't see us changing away from being quite Google oriented in how we manage discoverability.
Yeah, absolutely. We recently did some research in particular in medical information. So where do physicians go when they need they have a practical question? It could actually be a pretty trivial question about a particular therapy, right? And number one that came out was still their kind of more internal hospital systems. Like they typically run something like UpToDate or something like that. Second was actually Google. Third up was PubMed, right? So I completely agree with that shift. And you mentioned search engine optimization. Can any one of you maybe to start at the basics?
I often find it useful to distinguish between search engine optimization and search engine marketing a little bit, although really they've ended up being the same practice. The time was that search engine optimization meant very technical approaches to literally how is your web page built? How is the information on that page coded up? How are you signaling to a search engine? This is the title of the page. These are the keywords this page is about. That's long been superseded now because it's too standardized. Everybody's building web pages in a more structured way now and being clear to the search engines what the information is in different parts of the page. So the focus now is much more on not just telling a search engine, here is some information, but also trying to make sure that it will rank highly. Most of us, I forget the numbers now, but most of us never go beyond the first page of search results. So the big goal for everybody is always to get yourself onto that first page or even frankly into the top 3. So there's been a whole profession grown up about trying to make sure that your results rank highly for the topic. And that's about the language that you use on the page and the prominence that you give to certain phrasing and things like that, and the extent to which the words that you're using are aligned with the words that are being put into the user queries and all that kind of thing. But now increasingly, as I say, there's then even a move beyond just what is the content on the page to also Google trying to suck all that content out and present it back without people ever even clicking off of its own search results page. So the challenge becomes not only aligning your content with what search engines think is useful and authoritative in its structure. Comes back to what we were saying earlier, actually, about giving enough of that information up to make sure that you rank, but not so much that people don't need to click through to get to the rest of it. So it's a constantly evolving field. It's fascinating. It's gone from being what was a very technical code-based field to being something that is much more about language, really, which so I get quite excited about it. But it's a game that you're playing all the time to try and maximize the visibility and the discoverability of content.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the number is 80% of clicks go to the first 3 listed search results, right? So that's very powerful. And I like your thinking also about Google and search engines in general displaying, you have this AI summary now, right? When you go to Google, you look for something, but then still this AI summary is typically based on maybe search result number 1. It is typically related to one result. So there must be ways how you can position your content in a way to become the one summarized by AI. I'm really interested in the perspectives of Dan and Dave on search engine optimization. And so I think Figshare is very open, right? You're talking about we want to share it as much as possible and make it as accessible as possible. While Dave, your platform is closed, which has a lot of advantages. But I'm wondering how this reflects on search engine optimization and how you both go about that.
We really focus on, there's a set of principles called the FAIR principles. It's an acronym that stands for findability, accessibility, interoperability, and the reusability of research. And it's a set of goals that all organizations who are disseminating content are really trying to tick the boxes of, just be very specific and ensure that the content that they're disseminating on their given platforms are as fair as possible. And one of the tenets of FAIR is making your content as open as possible, but as closed as necessary. And so while Figshare is open and has a public-facing side of things, there is also a private side where you can embargo content or restricted access publishing. And so there are certain functionality that tries to meet organizations and researchers where they're at. But from the forward-facing side of things, the public side of things, we employed a ton of different strategies to ensure that research outputs are accessible, discoverable, and ideally citable. And a lot of that has to do with metadata optimization. So proper keyword tagging and description of the content that you're publishing on the platform. Search engine integration. We mark up all of our content for discoverability in the major search engines like Google, Bing, what have you, but also that next level down, that's a little bit more niche. We were an alpha tester with Google Dataset Search. And so we mark up all our content for discoverability there where appropriate. Similar with Google Scholar, depending again on the type of content, ensuring that research is discoverable there. And a lot of it has to do with just the key tenets of the ecosystem. DOI assignment requires a certain level of metadata in order for you to even mint a digital object identifier. And so once that DOI is also minted, it allows research outputs to be traceable and referenced in publications, which increases their likelihood of discoverability, but also potential of citation. Again, working with those search engines and ensuring that your content is marked up for discoverability there, but also looking at the more niche ones like a PubMed. We utilize PubMed link out. And again, it's this idea of if public content is well described and linked or referenced or cited, it also enhances the discoverability of it. But the last thing I'd maybe want to touch on is some of the ways that our pharma partners have been actually describing their content on Figshare. And much of the content that is published on the platform from a biopharmaceutical organization is usually tied to a peer-reviewed manuscript. And that peer-reviewed manuscript, it's published by a publisher. They're already making use of their own search engine optimization. And so what we've seen from some of our clients is they're actually saying, well, this is supplemental data for journal article title. This is a plain language summary for journal article title. So that not only bumps it up on the list, but if you are an HCP and know to search for something like plain language summary or lay summary of X clinical trial result that I'm trying to gain more insight into, that will also promote that content in a way that makes it more discoverable without necessarily gaming the system too much. It's just providing those additional linkages. And also, if you cite that in the publication, there's a chance that it'll pop up. So those are just some of the ways that we've been thinking about it and supporting organizations and making their research more discoverable. And it all fits within the functionality of the platform and within the rules of SciComm.
That's very exciting. Thanks for explaining that. A lot of new things there for me, actually. How about you, Dave?
The great thing about Sermo is that we don't rely on search engine optimization or discoverability. We go based on our platform and who our physicians are, what types of messages they'll be receiving. If a new publication is coming out in the area of oncology, if abstract poster be presented, if a symposium is taking place, we don't have to wait for people to look to say what's happening at ASCO. What we can do is push a post of information and education out to our audience of oncologists, 42,000 globally, 17,000 in the US, to where we know they're oncologists, where they're at geographically, what types of other information they are interested in, what their specialty may be. And so what we do is put that onto their feed. And instead of waiting for them to look for it, we show it to them. They want to have that education given to them, those messages given to them instead of being forced to look for them. So that's the difference between what a closed platform can do, such as Sermo. We know who the physicians are, which makes it great. I know I talk to a lot of my clients and I'll show them a post that they may have on a different site. And I said, hey, if you put this onto Sermo, this same post, instead of getting 41 likes, we can put this in front of 12,000 dermatologists. People aren't looking for it. They're not out there trying to find information. We're presenting it to them, which gives us all a great opportunity to reach a lot more people.
Yeah. So that means your focus is probably more on making sure as many physicians as possible join your platform and make active use of it. Yeah, that makes sense. It's really cool to see how your platforms are having different approaches that are all very effective and play nicely together. So that's exactly what I was hoping to achieve today, to get that clarity. Let's spend maybe a minute on metrics. Metrics is probably one of the biggest topics in medical affairs right now, right? Especially as we're venturing in more modern communication tactics and medical affairs wanting to show all the value that they create by communicating so effectively, but of course without being able to use some of the indicators that they would use on the commercial side, right? So the non-economic value of their communication tactics. How do you help medical affairs clients showing that their investments with your platforms are paying off?
Sermo has different types of metrics depending on what type of program. Some of the typical are the number of impressions, the engagements, the opens and clicks and such that you, as an organization, want to know how many people are actually seeing it, but and engaging. But we also then can go behind the scenes and say, what do those engagements do when it comes to conversations on the platform? What are individuals saying? Was the guy received well? Did it change perception? And so not only can we give you the typical KPIs, but we can actually show you a change in the mindset of a group of physicians who saw the data and it changed the way they viewed treatment of a patient, the identification of the patient, how they may work with other HCPs within the group. So we think that from a KPI and a metrics point of view, we can give you a lot of information besides just what are they seeing, but what are they saying? Because that's where you start getting the insights into, okay, how do I change my educational programs, or how do I change my scientific message to align with what physicians are looking for?
Yeah, we talk a lot about pathways to impact or pathways to change and that kind of thing. And again, coming right back to the objective, why are we producing this information in a medical affairs team? What is the point of this educational content? We're really trying to think about what is the outcome that we're trying to bring about and how can we help teams to track that journey and then to learn from what they've tracked to make that journey more effective next time. So I think we're of a really similar mindset. For us, it's about a basket of metrics, a range of metrics, and about as much other information and insight as we can fold into that as there is available. So right down at the very quantitative end of that, we're bringing in citations data about the publications on our platform. We're bringing in altmetric data about the publications, but also about the content that's been created in our platform and for which we've minted the DOI. We can also show the discussion of that content in altmetric, which of course then unlocks a whole lot of information about where those discussions have taken place and all that kind of thing. So we're bringing in external sources of data to map against the content that we're gathering or that is being created as a consequence of using our platform, whether that's just about the views of the content on our platform or more fascinatingly, I think, and more usefully, all the insights into the different channels that have been used to communicate and which of those has proven most effective. And that not only helps you to plan more effectively for the future. So actually, of all the different things that we did, it was the discussion in Sermo that generated the most traffic through to our content. And we can see that and we can compare that to a post in LinkedIn and to an email that we sent out or something like that. So you can map all of that and see that. And that is fascinating and gold dust. And again, coming back to what Dan was saying earlier, the more metadata you can capture around it, the more useful it is, because the more you can globalize out from it and say it's always the case that when we use Sermo, it generates the most traffic. The other thing that I think then that data is so powerful for is that following through the pathway to impact. So I often use a fishing rod analogy here, even though I've never been fishing in my life, but I picture those deep sea fishing boats with lots and lots of rods hanging off the edge. And that's your communication strategies, channels, discovery, etc. And it's testing the tension to say, interesting, we've got a lot of engagement in that channel or through that piece of communication or with that particular format of educational material. So clearly there's interest there, there's engagement there, we can follow that up. So the more strategic and organized you are at the beginning of the process in how you communicate, the more data you can capture along the way, the more powerful that data set becomes in terms of what you can do with it, what you can learn from it, and how it can help you be more efficient or more effective next time. So we're all about just trying to create a world of data between the content and the audience so that you can just be more strategic and purposeful about it.
Wow. Yeah, that's really nice. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, we've gone a while into this podcast without me mentioning that Figshare is part of digital science, and digital science has a number of research metrics tools, two of which I think have been mentioned so far, one being altmetric and one being dimensions, which is a database of journal content, really, and grant information. And so we as a platform, as the Figshare platform, leverage that information, and it can in turn present that to our clients or to our users, really. And so everything that's published or made public on Figshare is tracked by altmetric. so you can gain those insights into the attention that your research is having. And we also track everything that's published, Figshare DOIs for citation data in dimensions, looking for mentions of those DOIs in the scientific literature. And so what we're seeing with a lot of our clients is there is that initial attention that content receives. If you are, for instance, at a conference and you publish your poster on Figshare or conference proceeding, and that gets picked up by the conference hashtag and mentioned around, you're going to get some altmetric data, if it's mentioned on Blue Sky or Twitter, what have you, to show you who's been sharing that, who's potentially liked it, or what have you, gaining those insights to the initial attention. But with citation data, there's a lag. And we've only been working with pharma companies for a number of years, a little under 5 years, but we're starting to see that first wave of citation data as well, which is really exciting. So we can also say, hey, this information that you've published on the platform is showing that it's being used and reused in scientific literature, which is great. And then on the back end, you have more traditional metrics that you can provide to users, like views and downloads. And we have different ways of how we present that information. And at least from the enterprise standpoint, some of the info that we provide to our clients, we have just full-on back-end statistics that allow them to dig in a little bit more to understand the type of engagement that their content is receiving on the platform. And so sharing like a Google Analytics dashboard. I know earlier on in this podcast, Charlie mentioned how much time somebody spends on a link. Are folks visiting the site and then clicking off, or are they staying there and actually reading the content that's been shared? So just trying to provide a wide breadth of information that is valuable not only to the user, but also to the administrator and client who's trying to get the most out of their platform.
Yeah, that sounds really solid. And these insights are simply crucial, like Charlie was saying around the fishing analogy. If you're fishing where the fish aren't, then it's not going to work, right? So I really enjoyed our discussion today. Time goes fast. So I want to end with a closing question for you here, and that is, how do you envision digital communications in medical affairs or MedComms specifically to evolve over the next few years? Dave, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I think the biggest evolution that will take place is that especially in the medical affairs place, will start understanding the digital opportunities that are there, that one social platform is not the next social platform, one TPP is not safe as another TPP. That you really need to develop objectives and strategies that fit those social platforms that you're looking at. If you're looking at medical and clinical information being disseminated, certain platforms aren't the place to go. If you're looking to reach patients, that might be the place to go, or investors, as I said. So they're going to see the distinction between the term social media as part of that omni-channel discussion and start looking at social media as many different types of opportunities. And again, based on the objective of the program, you'll select your social media or your TPP accordingly.
How about you, Charlie?
I think one of the things that I anticipate changing relatively soon is the length of the content. Basically, I think at the moment, a lot of medical affairs educational content is still very oriented around the peer review publication, and it's long, deep, even though it's been condensed into educational content. I think in other sectors, including the academic sector, for example, and the wider research sector, there is, let's acknowledge, I guess it's the TikTok effect. So everything's being condensed down into more bite-sized things. I guess it also relates to the points I was making about Google wanting to see more Q&A oriented content, people's use of Quora and Reddit. I don't know, lots of different factors in the mix here, but I think in medical affairs, there's still quite a lot of relatively long-form content. I think we will see more bite-sized content. I think the ways in which we're sharing that will evolve, which is touching on what Dave is saying about a more nuanced and thoughtful use of different channels. I think there will be more segmentation of audiences as the data available becomes more evident. So we'll be creating content for much more specific and granular use cases and targeting those specific audiences rather than trying to get it all into kind of one piece and hoping people will figure out for themselves which part of it is relevant to them.
I like that. Often in strategic discussions around content strategy, I use the term one size fits no one. It's very often a little bit the case that, well, we want to create some content for these 6 audiences, but they're quite different, right? I like that you said that. Yeah. How about you, Dan? What are you excited about? What is the next 2 years going to bring in your view?
Yeah, seeing the digital first approach, I think that was mentioned earlier in the podcast, is this idea of content that's going to be generated is going to be thought of as we need to present this to the audience, but ensure that we can reach them in the channels and on the platforms that they're using. So embracing that digital first mindset is really key. I also think that there's going to be way more integration of AI into the space, whether that is in personal recommendations or being able to restructure that content, or as Charlie mentioned, create bite-sized summaries of the content so it can reach those audiences that it's intended to, or wider audiences so people can understand, HCPs or even patients can understand, is this something that I want to maybe participate in a clinical trial for, or is this going to help with a loved one who's ill? So trying to leverage AI to create those summaries, I think, is a big thing. But yeah, I really do feel that digital platforms can facilitate more interactive and more personalized interactions between HCPs and patients and the pharmaceutical companies. And so we're just going to continue to find efficiencies in how that's presented. Big way, I think, is just those integrations with AI as presenting those summaries. So that's just my take, but I'm fairly new to the space still.
I like your insight. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I really had such a great time discussing this topic with you. I think there's so much change still coming up and so much opportunity to improve communications in this space. So I can't wait to see what the future has on offer for us. Thank you for sharing all your insights. I know our audience is really going to be excited to hear about all of this, and it will be inspiring. So thanks again for your time today.
Thank you. It's been great fun.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Transforming Medical Communications is brought to you by MedComms Experts. To find out more about MedComms Experts and how we create some of the most cutting-edge medical communications programs anywhere in the world, visit www.medcoms-experts.com. And then make sure to search for Transforming Medical Communications in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at MedComms Experts, thanks for listening.